You are listening to the Do Podcast Speaker Series with your host,
Chokuka Koli.
Hey there, everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of Gas Forward. And this is about the future of energy and wealth, right? I'm your host, Chuka Okoli, and I'm super excited to have you, here with us as we kick off what promises to be an insightful and inspiring series. Okay, so this podcast is brought by Dowie Gas, and we are sponsored or powered by Radiant Money. So we'll be talking about all things energy, sustainability, and of course, we'll be talking about the opportunities that gas presents for driving Africa's growth. We'll be bringing some brilliant minds onto this podcast with us, and they'll be helping us break the industry and break it down and what's all about. Before we dive into today's series, I want to just give a quick shout out to Radiant Money for making this podcast possible. So Radiant Money are helping financial institutions with financial innovation, and they promote sustainability across Africa through this means. So big thanks to Radiant Money for making this possible. So today we're going to start strong, and our topic will be fueling the future, gas, climate, and wealth in Africa. And joining me is Mrs. Olatunji. I'm just going to have a little breakdown of what she does and who she is. So she is a research investment professional with over 14 years experience in banking, in finance, in energy, in economics, and in asset management. So she's a chief executive at Brockville Investments Limited, which focuses on the energy and natural resources sector. What she does in her career and how her career has spanned the roles in Guarantee Trust Bank, in First Bank Nigeria, also in Gigi Connect Nigeria Limited. And in these roles, she was able to successfully lead projects in oil and gas and field development, investments, diversity, and also in project finance. She's also the co-founder of the Business Outliers and holds a master's degree in petroleum and geosciences and economics. Not to mention, she's also a charter holder at the Chartered Global Investments Analyst Network, which is also called the CGIA, and is also a certified financial modeling and valuation analyst from Corporate Financial Institute in Vancouver, Canada. So, Ms. Olawumi, thank you for joining us and welcome.
Yeah, thank you very, very much. It's actually a pleasure to be here.
So maybe we'll dive right in. We're going to talk about the energy sector. The energy sector is really going through some interesting changes right now, especially in Africa. So everyone is, it's kind of like wondering or talking about how gas can be a game changer. What's your take on gas, on especially how we can drive the economic growth on the continent of Africa while still keeping sustainability in mind?
I mean, that's a very good area to actually start, because when we talk about gas, natural gas precisely, we know that it's actually positioned to transform the economic growth of not only Nigeria but Africa as a whole, especially when it can help us to a certain extent balance sustainability, with the economic growth that we're after. So because we all know that gas is a reasonably and relatively cleaner fuel when you compare it to coal or to diesel. And so if we're having that thought of, okay, how can we reach this transition to, net zero, gas is positioned as our transition fuel. And that's what the continent, even the nations, they're the kind of mindset that we have. If you think about the fact that Africa itself is endowed with significant gas resources, both confirmed and unconfirmed. We can think of as much as maybe over 600 TCF, trillion cubic feet of gas reserves that we have. So that in itself is a reliable energy source, and it can actually help us drive industrialization, drive job creation, and drive access to electricity, because power generation has become a bane. It's like you say, over 600 million people are lacking access to electricity. So natural gas can actually position itself, or can be positioned to bridge that gap so that we can use it to fuel our power plants. We can also think about industrial development, for instance. So we're talking about fertilizer plants that, this kind of fertilizer can help us drive food, agriculture, the agricultural sector. And of course, if you cannot talk about economic growth if you don't talk about job creation. And the whole industry, because it's highly capital intensive, it's very large and huge, there's going to be a lot of job creation. So if you think of, for instance, the Mozambique LNG project that Total Energies and partners are doing, is actually set to create about 15,000 jobs from different sectors for different parts of the value chain. So it's very important. I mean, natural gas itself is really, really transformative.
Great. Thanks for that. There are a few key things that you mentioned there that natural gas can do. One of them is actually to bring the jobs or to create kind of more jobs and opportunities for people here in Africa. Because in Africa, we're looking to strike a balance there between kind of like the jobs and the opportunities that are available. So how, by doing this, bringing natural gas into the mix and kind of helping balance or strike some kind of balance between what we have currently and what is available in the country, and it coming in to kind of like say help electricity or electricity production to also be added into the mix of these energies. How do you think Africa or African countries can kind of strike that balance between what's available and what they are using in their countries?
Well, like you said, there's a lot of potential, but this potential isn't fully explored, when it comes to electricity generation. And for us to fully explore this potential, we need to, look for the right kind of investments. That we need to attract investments that is going to help us actually develop this potential. So attracting investment will be the key to letting this change happen. Then I think a question a lot of people will now say is that what's really stopping us from attracting the right kind of investment? Firstly, I would say that we are attracting investments. There's foreign direct investment coming to different countries through multinationals, through all the other sources. However, we, as the government and the nations, we have to make sure that we have an environment that is very attractive for business. So business must, be able to say, okay, I can come into this country. There's the right regulation in place that will allow me to do business and be productive and generate the right kind of revenues without stifling. So we need the right policies, we need regulations that are in place to help attract developers into the space, to attract the financiers, to generally attract FDI into the different sectors, especially the gas sector right now.
Okay. That's great to hear. So that's one thing you say, almost like a security of their investments, because there are a few people that they will be very skeptical to investing in African countries due to a lack of security and or policies that will be pushing these investments, especially long term. Changes in maybe governments, changes in different policies, not really holding or standing by the policies that were already created to help assist, renewable energy or even just like gas development, natural gas development as a basis in countries. This is something that people that are international, say investors, will be looking at long term. Would this make sense after
Absolutely.
2 years? Make sense after 4 years? So yeah, this is very interesting because it's almost like what people are looking for when they are coming to invest in a country. Because a lot of the time, people might be confused thinking, oh, if you just have the gas or you have the resources, you can just start it, right? But there are other things that are involved with starting it and also keeping it running. Would you have anything to add to just maybe even the maintenance culture, what we have currently and how we can improve this?
Yeah, I mean, that's a valid point. You expanding a bit on the aspect of investors wanting to come into a particular locale or a particular country to bring in their investment, but they are concerned about security. They're concerned about policies, like I had mentioned earlier, and how a country ranks in what was described as the World Bank Ease of Doing Business Index in the past. I think they've stopped that ranking, but there was a time where World Bank was doing that Ease of Doing Business ranking, and so how different countries rank, gives maybe external investors a perspective of how they would do in that environment. So, for instance, something as simple as how they can even get to register their business, how work permits are given to expatriates that come into a particular location becomes also very, very, very key. And I know that a lot of countries have made progress, especially I'm talking about the gas space now. So, for instance, Nigeria, I'm generally talking about the energy space really at large. You will see that there have been a lot of changes and new policies. So, the Electricity Act came in 2023 to help progress and advance policies that would attract investment. So we've also been talking about market reflective tariffs. So when we're talking about the cost of electricity, maybe to an end user per kilowatt per hour, for instance, it's been complained that this cost is not market reflective. The same thing is the local cost of selling natural gas in-house compared to if I decide to take my gas, overseas and sell it. Would I be able to sell it at the rate that makes sense and is also helps me recover my investment? So these are the things that investors will want to see. But Nigeria has been able to make some adjustments in the acts and the different policies and regulations that helps bring that market reflective tariff, both from electricity point of view and also from the gas sales point of view. Now, when you're not talking earlier on also about maybe equipment, for instance, access to the right kind of equipment that is needed. So that I think has to do a lot with the developer is or herself or the company, the organization themselves, having a very clear understanding of the market. So you want to understand your market, you want to understand how you're going to play and where you're going to play. Where are the sources of, for instance, potential EPC contractors that will help you, bring in the equipment that you need? Are there equipment that can be sourced locally, or do you need to, import them? If you do import them, how long would it take for you to clear at the port? I was, recently speaking with a colleague of mine, and he was saying that heavy gas projects, if you want to get the equipment, that you might take about 8 years to request and all that before you can even bring these equipment on board, and that long lead time can actually lead to delay in launching your project. So all those kind of things has to put in consideration in a very detailed, very very detailed feasibility or even pre-feasibility study before a business, an organization, a developer even goes into any space, really, not just gas or energy space now, whatever new venture that you want to go into, especially when it's huge infrastructure projects like we're discussing, it's highly capital intensive. So for you to convince any potential partner, any stakeholder, whether government or even private investors, they want to see that the organization understands what they're doing, and then you have a feasibility that backs you up, to make you understand that yes, we know what we're doing. We know what could potentially go wrong, and we know how to react. So when these things do happen.
That's great. You definitely touch on a few key things there. And it is just very impressive to see at least that there's some movements being made in the electrical space. But just to anyone that's listening, to, our listeners, leaders, say business enthusiasts, and also just curious minds that are listening, like, what would be your advice or practical advice that you can give if they are looking to build here in Nigeria and they're looking to build something sustainable, right? They're looking to enter this field, which is the energy field, in any type of energy, say gas, for instance. What would be the advice you give them to build something that will be sustainable and also future proof at this stage?
Future proof. I mean, I like that. We need to think. And when you try to describe sustainability, you're thinking about how do I live, what I'm doing now, how do I leave things or resources for the next generation, even the future generation that, do not even exist right now. So for anyone really, whether you're a business leader, an entrepreneur, an investor, or like you said, just an enthusiast, if you want to go into the sector, you want to go into gas, I think the first thing you need to think about when you are designing projects is to think beyond just the projects that you're doing, but you need to integrate sustainability early on from what you're doing. So it's not just about, okay, let me extract my resources, let me, sell them or, process and sell, but you need to think about how are you able to fit low carbon energy systems into what you're doing. So for instance, how are you able to think about maybe carbon capture, and sequestration or whatever, to be able to make sure that you are a bit more sustainable in your act? How are you able to say, okay, why don't we reduce flare? Why don't you capture flare gas and make it, monetize that? That could be another direction you're looking at. Or is there a way that where you can even maybe put some renewable component into what we're doing? We want to integrate different energy systems to make sure that it's attractive. So you're thinking beyond the particular product, but you're thinking in a sustainable manner from the very early stage, from the design stage. So you're thinking about the kind of policies or how you can input that into what you're doing. Then another thing is to focus on the whole concept of how am I compliant? Is our project compliant with ESG, so environment and social and governance? So thinking about everything that we're doing, there's a lot of regulation that is coming in to tighten the work that projects are doing, companies are doing, just to help us to become more ESG compliant. So how are you aligning your work with the frameworks that are put in place such that not only would you be compliant with government regulations, but also you are able to attract investment, because you begin to see that investors now are thinking more from the impact dimension. How is your project, sustainable? How is it adhering to compliance, to regulations concerning ESG? So you want to think about that to make sure your projects are compliant. So for instance, if you're doing an infrastructure project, you need to make sure that you have an EIA, an environmental impact assessment in place. So with an environmental impact assessment, you're actually checking some checks on compliance to ESG. Then of course I always talk about partnerships, right? You need to secure the right partnerships from the very beginning of what you're doing. So most of the project developers, the projects that succeed, it's not because the visionaire did it on their own. No, it's because they brought in the right kind of partnerships, both technical and financing from the very onset. So which organization has the right technical capabilities that your own organization doesn't have? Maybe you should partner with them. Which organization has the right access, the right links to financiers? Because, there's so many kinds of financing that you can think about, but you need to look for financing that understand your sector, understand what you're doing, such that, because when we talk about, for instance, equity financing, it's a long-term marriage and you don't want hiccups along the way. So you need to be sure that the partners you're bringing on board have understanding of what you're doing. So I think that those are the key tips I could give to any new person that wants to come into this space.
That's very helpful, and thanks for your feedback. Just to touch on a few things that you said there, understanding the sector, having financiers that understand the sector. One of the things that does affect the sector, especially in Nigeria, would be inflation, right? So if like you said, sometimes we can take up to 8 years to order something, get it done, and actually get it set up. In between 8 years, a lot can happen in this country. So you have to definitely understand what you're doing and have everything kind of like keyed in from the onset. Also kind of coming into that context of knowing that you are good at this and that person is good at that, and you need to collaborate to actually be very good. Lots of people have egos. Lots of people are allowed that to actually take over them, and they just try and take the whole project instead of knowing that, okay, I'm good at this part and I know someone else that's good at that part, and we can get together and make the project more successful. They just take the whole thing and just kind of like do some pieces. You can have some good pieces and some bad pieces. The whole project might not be as successful. So it comes down to just kind of like the whole ego aside and letting people that are merited of this actual work, or people that are able to do the work properly to do it, giving them the chance to do that. And it can even range from the mechanical aspect, the electrical aspect, just actually coming together from the onset to say, okay, that we need this to be the best it can be, and getting the right people in, the right stakeholders and in from the onset will be great. So we'll just enter like interactive segment. We'll just maybe throw some questions your way, and maybe you can give us some actionable feedbacks, right? So I know that we might have talked about this a bit earlier, but maybe this is more of a shorter question. So natural gas, what is the biggest myth of natural gas in Africa? What do you think this is?
Well, from my perspective, I think one of the things that, especially when you're in the environment space, in the development space, one of the things that is being said is that natural gas is as harmful or as bad as maybe coal or diesel or, the other fossil fuel. But, if you can remember your secondary school chemistry, the component of natural gas is just 1 C of carbon. Compare that to coal, has a lot of C, and carbon is what we're talking about. We're talking about carbon emission, which combines with oxygen and forms CO2 and all that. So natural gas actually emits about 50 to 60% less CO2 when used for power generation. And then it's really crucial to being a transition fuel. From where we are currently, renewables is very powerful. It's helped a lot in electricity access. But we need huge megawatts of electricity electricity generation, transmission and all that. And natural actually what will take us to where we're going. So it's really, really more attractive to the environment. It's more beneficial. Well, it's not as harmful, let me put it that way, to the environment as compared to the other fossil fuels. So I think that's one myth that we need to understand, so that if investors and everybody in the space realize that this is a good opportunity to develop our economies, because we can use this to transform industries. We can use this to, once we have electricity access, power generation, we have natural gas for industry uses. And the best part is that even hydrogen, which is one of the very clean fuels, can actually be made from natural gas. So we have the green hydrogen, we have the blue hydrogen. So hydrogen can be made from natural gas. So I think that's one myth that we need to address.
That's very true, very correct. Natural gas is definitely a cleaner source from fuel. People all over the world are actually converting from fossil fuels like coal, like, burning any of the diesel or anything like that. Natural gas is way cleaner. Now, it might not be fully renewable, but it is the step towards renewability. It is the step towards kind of having a cleaner source of energy. And it's a first step for any country to take. To get to a fully renewable source, I believe that we have to first figure out how to fully generate the power, right? And generate clean power. Then we now start changing all those sources of generated power to more renewable sources. So this is very key, and thank you for that answer. Another question here will be the gas value chain. Would you just give us a bit of a breakdown, just enlighten us a bit on what your take is on the gas value chain, please?
Okay. I like to break down the gas value chain into about 5 key stages. And each of those stages is actually very important to delivering gas to the end user. So the first stage, I call it the A&P, which is the exploration and production. This is where we find the gas, we extract it, some light production, processing. So we do geology, the geology surveys, the seismic, and, drilling of wells and all that. We drill where we tap into the underground resources and from the reserves that we have, and we get our gas out. That is just stage 1. The next stage will be processing and treatment. So now, the raw natural gas itself contains impurities. So we have water, we have carbon dioxide, sometimes we have sulfur, which is the the carbon that we're talking about, that we have. So this processing removes this element so that we can have cleaner gas that industries and consumers can use. Then another stage will be the transportation stage. So gas is either transported via pipelines or can be converted to LNG, which is a liquefied natural gas, for easier shipment, really. And then can allow storage facilities to manage different fluctuations better. So that's the transportation and storage part of the value chain. The next will be distribution and where we get to use it. So the gas can now be delivered from that transportation to plants, to industries. If there are homes, that are used for electricity or whatever, for clean cooking, then that's another stage. In transportation, you can use it as CNG for vehicles. You can use it as fertilizer in industries and all. And then the final stage is now the end use application, where we can now use gas for electricity generation at the plants. We can use it for industrial heating, in petrochemicals. Like I said earlier, as a feedstock for hydrogen production. So these are the different parts of the value chain that I'd like to touch.
Thank you very much. That was very helpful, very informative. And just the last question we have here. In one sentence, how would you define climate conscious wealth?
Well, maybe we'll break down each of the different aspects. I might not be able to say it in one sentence, right? So climate and wealth. Wealth is accumulating riches and resources, while climate is when you're thinking of the environment. So I think I would say climate conscious is just making investments in a strategic manner that you're building businesses sustainably to ensure environmental responsibility, to ensure impact and long-term resilience. So climate conscious will be about maybe strategic investments in sustainable businesses and energy solutions that can drive growth. But while you are also ensuring environmental responsibility, you're ensuring social impact and long-term resilience. So I think that really sums and captures it.
That's very nice. Olatunji, I know that this has been very helpful to our viewers. I'm aware that you're very, very well versed with this in this space. I would love to talk definitely more about things. Let me just summarize a few things that you have said. We started from when you were talking about how people can get into the country, the kind of like different stages that they have to pass, information that they have to know prior to kind of coming and investing into the country. We talked about that. We talked about some myths that are kind of like still there, and they are more modern myths because they can be broken. People don't necessarily know, much about gas or the sector in Africa. This can be something that is a huge investment. You talked about like lead times, lag times for gas installations and just installations in the renewable sector or even in the energy sector in general. We talked about, even like policies that have to be put in by, like different unions. It can be from either the workers, or even from like a government level, to bring in different policies that can help quicken like the introduction of these types of energies or energy usage or energy kind of production into African countries. There are definitely many policies. There are European directives that are out there. There are SDG goals. There are so many other things outside there that are kind of like pushing different countries or member states to come in and try and make the world a more sustainable place. So Africa can be one of them. Africa is growing, and Africa, I think, will be one of the biggest economies with time. It has the most potential for sure, because that's the thing about the places with lower infrastructure have more potential to actually get there. So I think there's a lot of potential here. It's just that we need to kind of create a path for people to see that this is possible. It's not just a far cry. It's what other countries are doing and are doing well. As African countries, we can come together and even have directives that can push all of us that are involved in this directive to be better, to be more sustainable, to make a future that will be better for our kids. So thank you for the time. I really appreciate your insights on this. Just to conclude, this is Mrs. Olawumi, and this has been a very enlightening conversation. Thank you for sharing your insights. Thank you for all your experiences that you just kind of shortly shared. I think you've given us a lot to think about. And for everyone listening, thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe to Gas Forward, the future of energy and wealth in Africa. We're on Spotify, we're on YouTube, we're on Apple Podcasts, we're on websites. And again, thank you, Miss Olawumi, for your time. Would you have anything else just to add before we log off?
Okay, just to say thank you to everyone listening, and thank you to Dewey Gas, thank you, Chooks, thank you for everybody, the sponsors as well. So I really appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you very much. And please stay tuned in for our next episode. We'll be diving deeper, into Africa's energy and Africa's culture and Africa's future. There's a lot. It is a very, very energy rich, and the potential for energy growth is very huge. So please stay tuned in and take care, and we'll all keep pushing forward. Thank you, Ms. Olawumi. Have a blessed day.
All right then. Bye.